"You're just a loud black bitch." He said it live under oath with cameras rolling, and she just stared back. Not broken, just bracing for detonation. Because the woman he mocked was carrying a secret her mother died with. A patent number buried for 14 years. A tool used in Trump kitchens across 7 cities. A black woman's invention. Scrubbed clean and renamed Gold Grip, TM. No credit, no royalties, just silence. Enforced by contract. Until now, tonight, her daughter would make the world say the name they tried to delete. And the lie they built their empire on? She brought receipts. "Women like you belong in the kitchen." He said it with a smirk, not even raising his voice, just letting the words spill across the microphone like something he'd said 100 times before to 100 other women in 100 other rooms that didn't have cameras. But this room had cameras, and America was watching. For a fraction of a second, no one breathed. The Capitol Oversight Chamber, Room 214, fell into the kind of silence that doesn't come from shock alone. It came from recognition. Everyone in that room, from interns to seasoned representatives, had seen arrogance. But this wasn't just arrogance, this was violence, made palatable. Disrespect, delivered with a chuckle. And Jasmine Crockett was its target. She didn't flinch. She didn't glance to the chair. Didn't shift in her seat. Her hands didn't even move from the folder resting neatly in front of her. But her eyes told a different story. They didn't just look through him. They scanned him like a surgeon looking for a fatal weakness. And the man who once held nuclear codes didn't see it coming. President Donald J. Trump, no longer commander-in-chief, now sat before the committee as a defendant, facing allegations of gender discrimination, economic targeting, and minority labor suppression. For the first time in his gilded life, the gold wasn't behind him. It was gone. Behind him now loomed only the seal of the United States and a wall full of unspoken sins. He had survived bankruptcies, impeachments, indictments, but this was different. This wasn't about money. It was about memory. The microphone buzzed faintly, like even it knew something sacred had been violated. On screen, millions watched in real time. Retirees in Georgia nursing homes, military veterans in Arizona, line cooks in New Orleans who'd used the Gold Grip fryer handle every day and never asked where it came from. And now, maybe for the first time, they were asking, was that invention his? No. Was the name attached to it real? No, the real name was sitting directly across from him in a navy blue blazer with steel in her posture. Jasmine didn't blink. Her silence wasn't submission. It was strategy. For 5 full seconds, she simply let the insult hang in the air like an iron left burning on skin. Then Trump chuckled. A small, stupid sound, the laugh of a man who thought he'd won the exchange. His attorney leaned in, whispered something. Representative Jordan shifted in his seat, smirking like he was waiting for the firestorm, waiting for her to break. The outburst, the tears, the predictable, angry black woman trope that would make the headlines and hand them their next Fox segment. But Jasmine didn't break. She reached for her water, calm, mechanical, and tapped her fingernail against the table. Once, twice. The sound echoed like the start of a countdown. A female reporter in the back leaned into her mic and whispered, "She's not cracking. She's calculating." Twitter was already ablaze. Had KitchenGate trended in under 20 seconds. He told her to cook? He really just said that? Wait, is that the woman who... Yes, it was. The woman who had spent 2 decades studying policy, defending civil rights, advocating for women who looked like her, and quietly digging into one buried contract, the one her mother signed under financial duress, thinking it would lead to opportunity. It led instead to erasure. Jasmine's mind wasn't in the chamber anymore. It was in a tiny kitchen in South Dallas, July of 1990. Her mother's hands were cracked from grease burns. Her apron was stained with flour and oil. She was welding a makeshift prototype out of scrap metal, duct tape, and wire coat hangers. Jasmine had been sitting at the table, pretending to do homework, but really watching. Watching her mother bend steel with bare hands. Watching her draw blueprints on the back of cereal boxes and whisper prayers between solders. You invent with what they leave you, her mother used to say, and they never leave us much. Her name was Dolores Crockett, a single mother, a kitchen worker, and the true inventor of the adjustable fryer handle that would go on to be mass-produced, rebranded, and sold to commercial kitchens under Trump's hotel empire. The patent was real, filed in '91, number 45611K. But her name had never been printed on a single invoice. And tonight, Jasmine had brought the folder. She hadn't opened it yet, but its weight had already shifted the room, like a grenade with no pin, like a eulogy waiting to be read. The corners were frayed, the sunni faded, but inside was the name of a woman America never met, because a powerful man decided that name wasn't good for branding. Trump still didn't get it. He leaned in again, smug. See what I mean? He said, gesturing toward her with two fingers. Over-emotional, loud, always looking for a moment. The moment, it turned out, was his. Jasmine leaned forward slowly, adjusted the microphone like she was unsheathing a blade. Then she spoke, not loud, not shaking, just sharp. Mr. President, since we're talking kitchens, would you like to meet the woman who built yours? The chamber didn't gasp, it locked, like a trigger being pulled. And the woman Trump tried to mock into silence? She was just getting started. Long before the marble floors of Capitol Hill reflected the name Crockett in national headlines, there was a two-burner stove in South Dallas, rattling under the weight of dinner and dreams. It was July 1998, the kind of heat that made the walls sweat and the floor tiles warp. Cicadas screeched outside like sirens no one listened to. Inside, Dolores Crockett stood barefoot in a kitchen that didn't belong to her, wearing a grease-stained apron over a Sonic uniform and holding a blowtorch she'd borrowed from the neighbor 3 houses down. Her daughter Jasmine sat on the counter, legs dangling, chin in hands, watching. Dolores didn't speak much when she worked. She soldered like she prayed, with rhythm, with repetition, with breath held tight between clenched teeth. In front of her was the bent frame of what would become her prototype, an adjustable fryer handle that could absorb heat, prevent wrist burns, and allow fast food workers, mostly women like her, to cook without being burned every shift. The tools were borrowed, the blueprints were scribbled on the backs of receipts, folded, unfolded, stained with oil, taped back together. She didn't have AutoCAD. She had gas station pens, expired coupons, and a 6-year-old VCR that she used to rewind MIT VHS tapes borrowed from the public library. No grants ever came, no investors, no faith from anyone except herself, and maybe the girl watching her. You know what's wrong with these companies? Dolores muttered once, not looking up. They build tools for the hands that don't use them. Jasmine didn't answer. She didn't need to. She knew her mother wasn't speaking to her. She was speaking to every man who had ever called her a helper instead of a builder. Every supervisor who said, "You're lucky to have this job," as she massaged the third-degree burn on her forearm from a fryer basket designed by someone who'd never worked a single shift on a line. And so Dolores decided to build her own. The first prototype was crude. Aluminum tubing wrapped in duct tape, fastened with a makeshift hinge from a discarded umbrella handle. She tested it at home, using a pot of old oil and a slab of frozen tilapia. The handle worked. It didn't burn her wrist. It didn't slip from her grip. It felt like it belonged. She called it the edge, not because it looked sharp, but because it kept her on the edge of not quitting. She mailed the patent application 6 weeks later. USPS priority, 2-day delivery. Jasmine remembered the moment like it was lit in gold. Dolores stood on the porch, holding the envelope against her chest like it was a newborn. "Is that it, Mama?" Jasmine asked. "No, baby," Dolores said quietly. "That's the seed. We see if it grows." It didn't grow fast. Rejections came. 3 of them, all using nearly identical language, insufficient mechanical documentation, not commercially distinct, non-viable market entry. But Dolores read between the lines. What they meant was, you don't look like the inventor we expect. You didn't go to Stanford. Your mailing address isn't a tech park, it's a duplex behind a tire shop. Still, she revised the schematics, retaped the broken hinges, traded birthday cake orders for mechanical advice from a local community college student. She worked the day shift at the diner, took night shifts at the nursing home, and came home to solder in the dead hours when most people were dreaming. And through it all, Jasmine watched. Her mom's hands were never soft, not even when they wiped her tears. They were always calloused, split in places, wrapped in bandages that smelled like steel and old cooking oil. But those hands, they built something real. The approval finally came in early spring 1999. Patent number US 45611K, filed under Crockett. Dolores A. Jasmine remembered the way her mother didn't smile when she read it. She just exhaled, as if someone had finally let her up from underwater. They printed the patent certificate on cheap paper and taped it to the fridge, right beside Jasmine's report card. Dolores didn't throw a party. She just made cornbread and told Jasmine, "Now we wait for the world to catch up." The world caught up and then stole it. 6 months later, Dolores received a call from a man who said he represented a luxury hospitality group. He used words like scale, distribution rights, and partnership potential. She didn't understand all of it, but she understood the check, $18,000 up front, more than she'd ever held. They needed exclusive rights to her handle. She said yes. The contract arrived overnight, 3 pages. Buried on the second page, in fine print beneath legal language no single mother should be expected to decipher, was a clause. Client reserves the right to rebrand, rename, or remove inventor identification from all product packaging and marketing. She didn't know that was the clause that would erase her. She only knew Jasmine needed shoes, the rent was overdue, and her sister's breast cancer treatment ad wasn't covered by Medicaid. So she signed. And like that, Dolores disappeared. The handle? Renamed, repackaged, registered under a new corporate label. The Gold Grip TM, distributed to every Trump property from 2002 to 2014. Used in 7 cities, across nearly 90 kitchens. It won an Internal Innovation Award. It reduced worker injuries by 32%. Trump hotels celebrated it in press releases. But Dolores' name? Never mentioned again. She called. No one answered. She wrote letters. They were returned, and in the silence that followed, something colder than disappointment began to grow. She didn't tell Jasmine the truth, but Jasmine saw it anyway, in the way her mother changed the channel when a Trump commercial aired, in how she touched that patent on the fridge less and less. In the drawer she started filling with copies, documents, rejected letters, as if one day someone might need them. Someone did. Because one day a girl who once watched her mother weld steel in a kitchen without ventilation would sit in the Capitol of the United States, facing the man who profited off that silence. And she wouldn't come with rage. She would come with the one thing they never expected a black daughter to carry: receipts. The call came on a Thursday, 11:07 a.m. Dolores was elbow deep in soapy water, trying to scrub the burn ring off a cast iron pan when the phone rang. Once, twice, then a third time. She grabbed it with wet hands, pressing it between her shoulder and ear, still holding the sponge. The man's voice was polished, slick. "Ms. Crockett?" he asked slowly, like the name didn't belong to someone who could hold a patent. "I represent a client with high-volume culinary needs. We saw your design." She froze, her heart didn't leap. It clutched. They'd seen it. After all the rejection letters, the silence, the nights of thinking maybe it had been a stupid idea, someone had finally seen it. The man didn't say Trump, not at first, just a national hospitality brand with flagship properties in New York, Chicago, Vegas. He used phrases like scalable implementation, rapid rollout, and exclusive licensing. She didn't know what all the jargon meant, but she heard one number loud and clear, $18,000 up front, with a potential for future royalties depending on performance. For a single mother 2 months behind on rent, whose sister had just been diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer, that number sounded like breath. She didn't ask for a lawyer, she asked for an advance. The contract arrived the next morning via courier, triple sealed. Heavy paper, corporate letterhead. Stapled at the top were 3 crisp checks, one for the patent rights, one marked as a consulting honorarium, and one labeled bold retention bonus. The total, $18,000 plus projected 2% royalty post-deployment. It felt like wealth, but it read like debt. She didn't know what she was holding. Jasmine remembers watching her mother sit at the kitchen table with the packet spread out like a puzzle she'd never learned how to solve. Dolores wore her Sunday dress, not because anyone was coming, but because she thought it might help her make a yes that didn't feel like surrender. She read the contract twice, underlined a few phrases, circled one clause in red pen. Client reserves the right to rebrand, rename, and omit inventor attribution on all associated marketing and packaging as deemed appropriate for brand alignment. Dolores didn't understand all the words, but she understood what it meant. They could take her name off, make it look like she never existed, that her hands hadn't bent the steel, that her blueprints weren't taped to the fridge next to her daughter's drawing of their duplex. She paused, stared at that one sentence for a long time. Then she looked down at Jasmine's sneakers, soles flapping, one toe poking through, the rent notice on the counter, the medical bills in her sister's purse, the cold that had crept into the apartment and never quite left. And she signed. The pen hesitated mid-stroke, not out of fear, but mourning. Somewhere deep inside, she knew what she was giving away. But desperation writes its own kind of logic. When you're drowning, you don't check the rope for knots. You grab. Within 3 months, her design was rebranded. The Edge TM became Gold Grip, now an ergonomic innovation developed by the Trump Culinary Division. The patent number was quietly removed from the documentation. Her name erased completely. The internal product catalog listed it as TCD in-house tool number 4439A. Marketing kits went out to hotel procurement teams. Bulk orders were placed in 7 cities. And Dolores? She heard nothing. No follow-up, no royalty check, no thank you, no name. She called once. The number was disconnected. She called again from a payphone, left a message, no reply. The 3rd time, she got an assistant. She asked if they could confirm usage of her design. The woman paused, said she couldn't disclose client strategies. Dolores thanked her and hung up. Then she walked into the kitchen, opened the drawer, and slipped her copy of the contract under the stack of unpaid utility bills. She never brought it up again. But Jasmine noticed things. The way her mother would pause in grocery store checkout lines when she saw glossy photos of stainless steel Trump kitchens in lifestyle magazines. The way she'd turn the channel if a Trump Tower commercial played. The way she started locking the drawer that held her design notes. She still soldered, still worked the night shift, still fixed broken fryer handles for the local barbecue joint. But something was different, a little quieter, a little heavier, like the light had shifted just a few inches to the left. And Jasmine, she kept watching. Watched her mother serve meals in a town that didn't know her name. Watched her hands, once full of blueprints, begin to move slower. Watched the very thing she built become someone else's success. It didn't happen with a bang. No courtroom drama, no headlines, just 3 pages of legal print, one tired signature, and the quietest theft in the world, the kind that doesn't steal money. It steals memory. But memory has a funny way of surviving, because that drawer, Jasmine opened it years later, and inside she didn't just find a contract, she found the fuse. The first time Dolores saw the commercial, it was on Channel 8, sometime around midnight. She wasn't looking for it. She'd been folding laundry, half watching a rerun of a sitcom, when the ad cut in. Polished steel kitchens, marble countertops, sleek jazz music beneath a deep male voice. At Trump Hotels, we bring five-star precision to every plate. And then it appeared. For only a second. A flash. But she knew it. Knew the curve of the handle. Knew the slight asymmetry in the joint where the adjustable bracket met the grip. She had bent that metal herself. That was her design. Her handle. But in the commercial, it wasn't called the Edge. It was part of the Gold Grip TM collection. Described on screen as an award-winning ergonomic line developed exclusively for the Trump Culinary Division. Dolores dropped the towel she was folding. Not out of shock. Out of something colder. Recognition. She sat down, not blinking, barely breathing, as the ad rolled on. She watched a chef, white coat, clean hands, hold her invention like it was made in a lab, not in a two-room duplex with a busted AC and a girl doing homework on the floor. He twisted it, showed the safety feature, smiled into the camera like it was his. The ad ended. Dolores didn't move for a full minute, not because she didn't believe it, but because deep down, she always had. Some part of her knew the moment she saw that contract clause. Knew it when the second check never came. Knew it every time she looked at the patent taped to the fridge and felt the tape edges curling, as if the paper itself had started to give up. She didn't cry. She just stood up, opened the drawer, and placed the rent check next to the contract. Then she turned off the TV. But the ads didn't stop. They got slicker, longer. Started appearing in high-end magazines, glossy spreads of Trump hotel kitchens with captions like, "Where design meets innovation." There it was again, her handle, spotlighted like a celebrity. No mention of the woman who built it with scrap and solder. No credit, no footnote. She saw it in a flyer at the bus stop once, and in a press release in the newspaper a coworker left behind. Each time it felt like the same slap. Not a new wound, but the same one, opened again, and again, and again. One day Jasmine came home from school waving a brochure she'd picked up from the public library. It had a picture of a hotel kitchen on the cover. "Mama, isn't that your handle?" she asked. Dolores glanced down, paused, then said without looking up, "No, baby, that's somebody else's now." It wasn't bitterness in her voice. It was vacancy, like her name had been hollowed out, like the price of silence had come due, and the currency was her very existence in the story. But silence doesn't just erase you from the world. It erodes you from within. She stopped talking about the patent altogether. The certificate stayed on the fridge, but the pride behind it faded like the ink. The soldering station got dustier. The burned tips of her gloves never got replaced. Her shoulders rounded a little more each month. But what the world didn't see was that Jasmine saw everything. She saw her mother go to work early and come home late, walk past a product display at a local hotel supply store without even stopping to look. She saw her pause when someone on the radio praised Trump's entrepreneurial genius. She saw her sit alone at the table at night, hands folded, not praying, just remembering. And Jasmine didn't forget. She remembered every time her mother's fingers blistered from building a better tool. She remembered the way she flinched when that commercial aired again, but never said a word. She remembered the silence. Not just what was missing from it, but what it was hiding. Trump never knew her name. Didn't have to. The NDA made sure of that. It was written to protect brand alignment, but what it really protected was the myth that innovation only came from men in boardrooms, not women in hairnets and borrowed shoes. What it protected was the illusion of power built on invisibility. And for over a decade, it worked. The Gold Grip TM became a staple in Trump kitchens. Internal memos praised it for reducing burn injuries by 30%. Staff across hotels were trained on how to use it, told it was part of the Trump touch. Chefs were quoted in trade publications calling it revolutionary. It won awards. It got mentioned in a Forbes article once. Trump hotel kitchens boast some of the most advanced ergonomic gear in hospitality. The article named a VP of culinary strategy, not Dolores, never Dolores. She kept her head down. But Jasmine kept her eyes open. One night, she tiptoed into the kitchen after her mother fell asleep and opened the drawer her mom always kept locked. Inside was the contract, the faded checks, the original patent, a stack of letters, some unanswered, others returned unopened. At the bottom, a printout of the gold grip TM product listing with the price circled, 180.99 per unit. Jasmine stared at that number, did the math. If each Trump kitchen had just 10 of them, and there were 90 kitchens, that was over 170,000 in equipment. And her mother got 18 grand once for all of it. She held the papers like they were radioactive, not because they hurt, but because they burned. That night, she made herself a promise. One day, someone was going to say her mother's name, and it wasn't going to be whispered. It was going to be on record, under oath, with the whole world watching. Because some inventions change kitchens, others ignite revolutions. Jasmine Crockett had always known her mother was brilliant, not in the kind of way that demanded applause, but in the kind that held everything together even when the world tried to come undone. Dolores Crockett didn't boast. She didn't ask for credit, but she also didn't forget, and neither did her daughter. It was during her second year of law school, while home for winter break, that Jasmine stumbled across the contract again. She hadn't gone looking for it, not exactly. She'd been cleaning the hall closet, searching for an old photo album, when a thin, worn envelope slipped from the back of a cardboard box marked taxes. Inside were documents she'd seen before as a child, but now held new weight in her hands. 3 pages, faint blue ink, her mother's signature, small and careful, near the bottom. But it was the middle of the second page that stopped her breath. The clause she hadn't understood at age 10, but now read with the precision of a woman trained in constitutional law. Client reserves the right to redact or omit any and all identifying demographic information of the original inventor where deemed necessary to preserve brand cohesion. She read it again, then again, and a third time, slower. It didn't say they could remove her mother's name. It said they could remove her identity, race, origin, anything that didn't match the brand. Brand cohesion wasn't just about fonts and color palettes. It was about skin. She felt her stomach turn. This wasn't just a case of corporate oversight. This wasn't a paperwork mix-up. This wasn't even just theft. This was a surgical erasure, executed by professionals, protected by legality, designed to be untraceable. She whispered out loud, as if testing the truth on her tongue. This wasn't just about hiding a name. It was about erasing a race. Something shifted in her then. Something ancient. Something her mother had buried beneath the long hours and soft-spoken sighs. Jasmine felt it rise slowly, like heat through a cracked foundation. She took the folder back to her dorm in D.C., scanned every page, ran it through OCR software, highlighted key phrases, printed it out again, and read it under 4 different lights. She searched the patent number through the U Patent and Trademark Office. It was still there. Dolores Crockett, unchanged, valid. But everywhere else, it was missing. She Googled Gold Grip, TM, Trump Culinary Innovations, Patent Attribution, TCD Product Catalog. Nothing. Not one official record acknowledged an external inventor. Every public-facing article credited in-house R&D teams. Every promotional video described the design as proprietary. There was no footnote, no hint, no shadow of her mother's hands. She knew this kind of erasure wasn't an accident. So she began tracing the people behind it. It started with a LinkedIn profile, a procurement officer at Trump Hotels in 2002. Then a product development manager who'd spoken at a conference about safety upgrades in commercial kitchens. She watched a grainy YouTube clip of him holding up her mother's handle and calling it our proudest internal solution. Her fingers shook. She paused the video, screen capped his face. Then she kept going. She pulled corporate filings, searched archived supplier lists, dug through old versions of hotel catalogs via the Wayback Machine. Slowly, painfully, a map began to form. Names, titles, product codes, dates. She filed a faux IA request, requested archived promotional materials. began documenting every instance of the handle's public appearance. And then, the breakthrough. Buried in a 2003 culinary trade magazine, a scanned PDF so low resolution it hurt her eyes, she found it, an interview with a Trump Hotels executive who described the gold grip, meaning a solution developed through external consultation, later absorbed into internal innovation. External consultation. That was her mother. That was the missing link. But it wasn't enough. She needed more. She needed the internal communications, the emails, the memos, the quiet decisions that turned Dolores Crockett into unattributed. She reached out to whistleblower groups, former staffers, hotel line workers. Most didn't reply. A few hung up. But one man, a former procurement coordinator who now ran a bakery in Virginia, agreed to meet. Off the record, he said, I've got nothing to gain and everything to lose. They met at a roadside diner. Jasmine arrived early. He showed up 14 minutes late, eyes scanning the parking lot. He looked like someone who hadn't spoken a full truth in years. His hands trembled as he handed her a folder. Nothing dramatic, just a few printed emails from 2001, a product onboarding summary, and one memo marked confidential. She read it slowly, and there it was, in faded ink. Remove reference to Crockett. Client advised not to attach inventor profile due to visual/racial misalignment with brand projection. Approval. L. Felton. Her throat tightened. She looked up at the man, barely able to speak. You didn't know what you were part of, she said. He shook his head. We didn't ask questions. We just followed the paperwork. She closed the folder. I'm not following anymore, she said. I'm going to tear it apart. He looked at her, eyes filled with something close to awe. You're her daughter, huh? I am, Jasmine said, standing, and I'm also a lawyer. They erased the wrong family. From that moment forward, the quiet fury of a daughter became something sharper. She wasn't just building a case. She was building a reckoning. One clause, one memo, one erased name at a time. And when the time came, she would walk into that hearing room not as a grieving child, but as a storm in heels, with evidence, a voice, and the memory of a mother who bent steel to keep the lights on. Because if they thought silence was going to last forever, they'd forgotten who raised her. The red tally light on the C-SPAN camera blinked once, then locked solid. Live. No edits, no do-overs, no time delay filters. Jasmine Crockett adjusted her microphone. Across from her, Donald J. Trump reclined with the smug nonchalance of a man who believed he was still untouchable. The once and would-be president, now seated not behind a podium or at a rally stage, but before the Congressional Oversight Committee on Government Procurement Ethics. He wasn't flanked by cheering fans or gold-plated flags. He was flanked by lawyers. And yet, he smiled, because old habits die hard. Because he'd learned long ago that when you speak with just enough swagger and just enough condescension, rooms bend, cameras soften, people forget. He'd built an empire on that gamble, betting that the louder he laughed, the less they'd ask where the money, the ideas, the power really came from. Jasmine didn't smile. She didn't shift, didn't clear her throat. She just placed one hand gently on the folder in front of her. A weathered manila file, the corners frayed, a faded federal seal barely holding on at the edge. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. Its very presence shifted the temperature in the room. Trump noticed it. He leaned forward and squinted at the folder like it was a prop in a performance he hadn't been briefed on. Another long-winded monologue incoming, he muttered, loud enough for the mic to catch. A chuckle echoed from a few seats down. Representative Jordan's signature half laugh, half dare. Still, Jasmine said nothing. Not yet. Because this wasn't theater. This was ignition. A ripple moved across the room. Reporters adjusting lenses, aides leaning in, networks scrambling to update chyrons. Breaking, Crockett versus Trump, live oversight hearing. Tensions build as evidence folder appears on committee table. On social media, the theories had already begun. What's in the file? Is she about to drop a bomb? That folder looks like it's been waiting 20 years. They were right. Inside that folder were copies of the original NDA, the patent registration, internal memos, whistleblower transcripts, and the note from 2003, the one that said, remove reference to Crockett, racial misalignment. But Jasmine didn't start with evidence. She started with silence. 30 full seconds passed before she even moved. In a world addicted to speed, her stillness became thunder. Trump fidgeted. His fingers tapped against the table. His lips twitched. He shifted once, then again, crossing his arms, uncrossing them, his confidence beginning to fizzle under the weight of no reaction. Then he cracked. You know, I've had more productive meetings with interns, he said, smiling toward the cameras. She's just sitting there. What is this, a performance? Jasmine blinked once, slowly, then leaned into the microphone with the kind of steadiness that doesn't shake because it was never built to. Mr. President, she said, voice low and razor clear, how many commercial kitchens in your properties use ergonomic, heat-resistant fryer handles? Trump rolled his eyes. I don't know. I don't design kitchen gear, sweetheart. The word sweetheart landed like acid, but Jasmine didn't react. Instead, she reached into the folder and pulled out one sheet, a printed screenshot of a product catalog from 2004, Trump Hotel Culinary Tools, page 7, a photo of the Gold Grip TM handle, used in 7 Trump properties, described as a custom innovation developed exclusively for our culinary operations. She held it up for the room. Trump blinked. Camera zoomed. Do you recognize this? She asked. He shrugged. Looks like a handle. Jasmine nodded. A handle your hotels purchased in bulk. Over 900 units between 2002 and 2014. A murmur spread. Is there a point to this? Trump asked. There is, Jasmine replied, sliding the next page across the table. A copy of U.S. Patent number 45611K, filed in 1991. Inventor, Crockett, Dolores A. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The name hit the room like a slow-building earthquake. Subtle at first, then undeniable. Trump looked at it, then at her, then at the cameras, and Jasmine continued. This handle, the one used in your kitchens, in your promotional videos, listed in your catalogs, was not invented by your culinary team. It was built by my mother in a duplex kitchen in South Dallas with duct tape and a blowtorch. Dead silence. C-SPAN's audio feed was still, but the internet wasn't. Holy shit. She said her mother. They used a black woman's invention and erased her. And Jasmine, still calm, placed a third document on the table, an internal memo scanned in grayscale with a single line highlighted. Remove reference to Crockett, client advised racial misalignment with their brand image. She looked up, directly at Trump, his jaw clenched. That, she said softly, was not about business. That was about erasure. The room held its breath. For the first time in hours, Trump didn't speak. Not because he didn't have something to say, but because for once he knew it wouldn't matter. Because the folder was open. Because the name was spoken. Because the truth was finally, irrevocably, on the record. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. This wasn't about the theater of revenge. This was about gravity and letting it do its work. She turned the next page of the file with the same care one might use handling a birth certificate or folding a flag at a soldier's funeral. And then, without preamble, she held it up for the cameras. A worn, yellowed copy of U.S. Patent number 45611K, filed in 1991. At the top of the name, Inventor, Crockett, Dolores A. Filing date, June 3rd, 91. Title, Adjustable, Heat-Resistant. Fryer handle, class in 99, 456. A simple design, 2 curved metal arms, a rotating mechanism, an insulated grip. But what mattered wasn't the engineering. It was the name in bold. Her mother's name. There was no flourish, no dramatic monologue. Jasmine simply laid the paper on the desk, tilted toward the camera, and read, "This patent, this design, this safety innovation that has reduced workplace injury by over 30% in commercial kitchens across the country was invented by my mother, Dolores Crockett. Not a committee, not a corporate lab, not a billionaire. A black woman in South Dallas with a soldering iron and a dream." The room didn't erupt. It didn't need to. What fell was not noise, but stillness. The kind of silence that lands when something sacred is said out loud for the first time in years. Trump's lips parted slightly, but no words followed. His signature smirk had vanished, replaced with something that looked, for the first time, like confusion, maybe even recognition. But by the time it arrived, it was already too late. Behind him, one of his aides dropped a pen. A journalist in the gallery choked on a sip of water. Another whispered, "Oh my God," though her mic wasn't hot. A third simply stared, blinking, as if trying to process how something so small, a piece of paper, could crack open an empire. But it could, because it wasn't just paper. It was evidence. It was history. It was her mother's fingerprint etched into steel. Jasmine didn't stop. She slid the next page into view. A printout of Trump Hotel's 2004 internal kitchen procurement list, listing the Gold Grip TM handle as product number 4439A, internal engineering patent, confidential source. You listed it as internal engineering. You removed the patent number. You buried the name, she said, voice steady but cutting. You took a working-class black woman's invention, rebranded it, made millions, and gave her nothing, not even acknowledgement. She tapped the patent paper. Until now. Trump opened his mouth, possibly to interrupt, possibly to pivot, but his mic was off. Committee rules gave the floor to the speaker. His voice, for the first time in the hearing, was useless. And Jasmine wasn't finished. She turned to the third exhibit, the email. The one flagged by the whistleblower, signed off by Lance Felton, then Chief Financial Officer for Trump Hotels. The one with the sentence, "Do not attach photo, remove all identifying racial data." Final attribution, none. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. Instead, she let it sit in the chamber like a ticking clock made of shame. "You didn't just steal," Jasmine said. "You redacted. You sanitized. You repackaged. And you did it deliberately. Because my mother's face didn't fit your brochure." Her voice didn't rise. Her spine didn't bend. But her words, they landed like hammers. Across the country, living rooms lit with tension. At a bar in Atlanta, two retired line cooks turned to stare at the screen, mouths open. At a church in Detroit, a community group paused their meeting mid-prayer to watch. In a Texas hospital, an elderly woman clutched her daughter's hand as she whispered. She said her name. She finally said her name. And in a small kitchen in South Dallas, now quiet and stripped of fire, the wind through a cracked window lifted the corner of a laminated patent certificate taped to a refrigerator, the one no one had noticed for decades. Jasmine turned her attention back to Trump, eyes locked. "For 12 years, your kitchens were safer because of my mother. Your chefs were faster, your injury rates went down, and every time someone thanked your company, it should have been her name," they said. She paused. Let that truth sink into the wood grain of the table. "Do you know what happens when you erase someone's name?" she asked quietly. "They don't vanish. They multiply." And with that, she folded the final page of the folder and looked into the cameras, not at Congress, not at Trump, but at the people watching, the ones who'd been overlooked, underestimated, cut from their own contributions, and told to be grateful. "My mother didn't invent something flashy," she said. "She invented something necessary. And for every woman whose name got deleted, every hand that got edited out, every black mind rebranded into silence, we are coming. With documents, with memory, with fire." Trump said nothing. Not because he didn't want to, but because in that moment, it was finally clear. He was no longer the loudest voice in the room, and no one was laughing anymore. The moment Jasmine Crockett read her mother's name into the congressional record, something irreversible began. It was no longer a hearing. It was a breach in the dam. Within 12 hours, the Oversight Committee authorized a full-scale federal investigation into procurement records and patent licensing across Trump hotels and its affiliated culinary divisions. A bipartisan task force was assembled, quietly, then urgently. They subpoenaed purchase orders, supplier contracts, manufacturing records, internal memos, and backlogged legal correspondence dating as far back as 1999. What they found wasn't one mistake, it was a blueprint. Over 317 patented innovations had been funneled through private agreements, NDAs, and vendor contracts. Inventions used in everything from kitchen tools to bedding technology, ergonomic carts to scent dispersal systems. And out of those 317 entries, 271 had no inventor attribution listed anywhere in corporate filings. The patents existed, the names existed. They were just scrubbed. And in over 90% of those cases, the original inventors were women of color, cooks, engineers, nurses, maintenance workers, immigrant seamstresses who modified fabric tension in hotel curtains, a Latina maid who developed a method for folding linens more efficiently. Her work turned into a trademarked Trump Fold TM, showcased in press releases, while she returned to the Bronx to clean apartments for $12 an hour. The erasure wasn't sloppy, it was deliberate. NDAs were weaponized. Attribution clauses were buried in legalese. In-house development was used as a veil. Internal documents revealed strategy notes like, avoid personalization in public-facing materials, and minimize ethnic identifiers unless brand-aligned. Each redacted name was a stolen legacy. Each unattributed design was a muted voice. And Jasmine, she documented them all. Her office, once a quiet corner of Capitol Hill, became a war room. Walls covered in patent printouts, names written in red marker, timelines built in silence. She brought in volunteers, law students, retired engineers, multilingual researchers who combed databases and translated patent records filed decades earlier by women who'd never spoken English fluently, but knew how to build something better. The patterns grew clearer. One handle became 2, then 20. Then entire departments built on borrowed brilliance and vanished signatures. Jasmine's team discovered that many of these women had no idea their ideas had even been used. Most thought they'd been rejected. Some had never even received a rejection notice, and for some, it was already too late. One inventor, Kamla Desai, an Indian-American woman who had developed an automated valve for beverage dispensers, died in 2012 of pancreatic cancer. Her family only found out her technology was in use at Trump hotel bars when they saw Jasmine's televised hearing. Another woman, Pilar Mendoza, had invented a vacuum compression technique for hotel bedding. Her patent had been quietly bought out by a Trump supplier. She now worked in a dry cleaning shop and had no idea her method had saved the hotel chain millions in laundry costs. This wasn't just theft. This was cultural laundering, white labeling invention, polishing off the fingerprints so they wouldn't interfere with the branding. The kind of theft that doesn't just steal credit, it rewrites the story of who gets to be called genius. By the third week of the investigation, Jasmine stood before the Oversight Committee with a 178-page interim report titled Silent Hands, a Systemic Erasure of Minority Inventors in Hospitality Infrastructure. She didn't yell. She didn't plead. She simply read the names. Name after name. Name after name. Maria L. Thompson. Folding hinge design. Tasha Nyong'o. Quick-release steam trap. Anais Rollins. Hypoallergenic detergent formula. Dolores Crockett. Ergonomic fryer handle. No sound in the chamber. Only the names. The broadcast cut live to newsrooms across the country, and for a moment, America didn't look away. Not because it was shocking, but because it was familiar. Every viewer had known someone like Dolores, a mother, a grandmother, a colleague, a janitor who rigged a broken cart to make the wheels spin smoother, a nanny who sewed a better baby wrap from old scarves. People who built, people who solved, people who were never given credit. That night, had they built that, trended at #1. Stories poured in, teachers, cooks, mechanics. One woman posted a photo of a rolling stool her grandmother had made by hand. Another shared her aunt's homemade garment press that had been copied by a major brand. Stories once shared over kitchen tables and family reunions were now flashing across the national feed. Jasmine didn't rest. She requested the full audit. She pushed legislation into motion. She called for restitution, attribution, and most of all, recognition. Because this was no longer about one daughter avenging her mother's name. This was about a nation being asked one hard question. How many black and brown hands built the world you live in while being written out of its story? And the silence that followed wasn't confusion. It was guilt. It was clarity. It was the sound of a country realizing that the story of greatness it had always told itself was missing entire paragraphs. And Jasmine Crockett, she wasn't erasing anyone. She was bringing them back, one name at a time. The morning after Jasmine Crockett read her mother's name into the congressional record, the world did not return to normal. Instead, it lit up. The hashtag Dolores built that exploded. 10 million mentions in under 36 hours. Not just retweets or headlines, not just think pieces. It became something living, something shared, something carved into the country's digital bloodstream. Not out of outrage, but reverence. It started small. A teacher in Des Moines posted a photo of a makeshift reading chair her mother had built out of scrap wood in the 1970s. Mom couldn't afford new furniture. She made this. No patent, no credit. But every kid in my class sat in it. Dolores would have understood. A cafeteria cook in Detroit uploaded a picture of a dented aluminum ladle with the caption, "My Aunt Marlene bent this to fit her wrist after burning herself 3 times. I just found out her handle was copied by a major brand. She never saw a dime." A seamstress in El Paso shared an image of a hand-drawn stitch pattern taped to the back of a door. Tia Luce invented this fold when she was 17. She taught it to hotel workers for free. They called it corporate optimization. We called it survival. The posts were unfiltered, raw, full of old photos, faded notebooks, burned fingertips, and trembling pride. Jasmine didn't expect it. Her office phone rang nonstop. Her inbox flooded with over 23,000 emails in 3 days. Not from lobbyists or journalists, but from mothers, daughters, uncles, caretakers, factory workers, people who hadn't been seen in years or ever. They wrote, "She was like Dolores. We use that tool every day. I never knew the name behind it. Now I do." One message stood out. It was a voice memo from a woman in Philadelphia. Elderly, breath short, voice soft. "Ms. Crockett, I worked in a Trump Tower kitchen for 11 years. I use that damn handle every day. Burned my hand once, blamed myself. I thought it was just some fancy tool. Now I know. It came from someone like me. I can't stop crying. Thank you." Jasmine played it 3 times. By the third, her hands were trembling. This wasn't politics anymore. It was memory coming home. And it didn't stop at social media. Restaurants across the country began placing signs in their kitchens that read, "Dolores built that." Teachers added her name to history lessons under American Innovators. In Portland, a group of Black mothers started a free workshop called Mothers Who Invented, where women could share and protect designs they'd kept hidden for decades. A museum curator in Chicago reached out to Jasmine asking for permission to exhibit the original patent. Within a week, they created a temporary installation titled The Invisible Blueprint: Inventions You Know, Names You Don't. Visitors stood in line for hours. School groups took notes. Tour guides read Dolores's name aloud like scripture. And still, the wave grew. A culinary conference in New Orleans held a moment of silence before their keynote panel. Not for the death of a figure, but for the rebirth of a name. One chef walked on stage, held up a battered, rubber-wrapped handle and said, "I used this for 15 years, never knew who made it, Now I do. From now on, we call it the Crockett grip. The room applauded, some cried. In high schools, young girls wrote essays titled "The Woman Who Wasn't in My Textbook." In small-town barbershops, old men nodded slowly as they watched replays of the hearing on looped flat screens above cracked mirrors. In Sunday sermons, pastors quoted Jasmine's testimony. One church rewrote their bulletin, "Give credit to whom credit is due," Romans 13:7. This week we honor Dolores Crockett. It was national, but it felt intimate because everyone knew someone like her. Everyone had been raised by someone whose brilliance was camouflaged as survival. And as the public stood with Jasmine, the government moved too. Lawmakers from both parties called for a formal review of patent law abuses and NDA practices. A resolution was introduced in Congress to retroactively credit unacknowledged inventors whose work had been white-labeled through legal technicalities. News anchors stopped asking if this was theft. They started asking how many others were missing. And still, Jasmine said nothing to the cameras, because this wasn't her moment to claim. It was her mother's, and every mother like her. One day as she walked past a hardware store in Virginia, she stopped cold. In the display window under a mounted plaque was a familiar object, a handle, bent just so, wrapped in soft rubber, burned slightly at the tip. Below it, in bold silver letters, "Prototype donated by Jasmine Crockett in honor of Dolores Crockett, inventor, mother, builder." She stood there for a long time, not smiling, not crying, just still, like the whole world had finally stopped moving fast enough to see what was always there. Because some stories aren't invented, they're inherited. And when they're finally spoken aloud, the whole nation listens. They said Congress would never move fast. But some truths shift gravity. The Dolores Act passed in 89 days, a speed so rare on Capitol Hill that it made history before the ink dried. Not because of political pressure, not because of polls, but because the story had settled deep into the bones of the country, and lawmakers knew what the cameras would never show. Silence no longer offered shelter. The full title read, "The Dolores Crockett Invention Protection and Restoration Act," the Dolores Act, a bill to amend patent law and federal contracting guidelines to retroactively recognize and compensate inventors whose names were redacted, removed, or concealed from attribution through private agreements, government contracts, or corporate rebranding, and to establish a permanent review commission under the United States Patent and Trademark Office. It wasn't just a symbol, it had teeth. Section 1 mandated that all government contractors disclose the origin of patented technologies used in federal procurement. Section 2 offered a re-examination window, allowing previously silenced inventors or their surviving families to submit evidence and reopen attribution cases. Section 3 created legal consequences for corporations found to have engaged in systemic authorial suppression. Section 4 established a federal fund, $850 million, for compensatory grants to victims of patent erasure. The bill passed with 321 votes in the House, 61 in the Senate, with both independents and even a handful of Republicans breaking party lines. The president signed it on a Wednesday morning in front of a room full of inventors, union leaders, students, in one empty chair with a single nameplate, Dolores Crockett. Jasmine stood behind the podium that day. Not for the cameras, not even for the law. She stood because someone had to bear witness. Because for every dollar in that fund, there was a woman who died thinking her idea had been worthless. For every clause in that bill, there was a pair of hands that built something with no blueprint, just need and brilliance and fire. Her name was on the act. But the truth was, it didn't belong to her. It belonged to the hundreds of names now pouring into the commission's inbox. Doreen M. Lee, 1987 textile class prototype. Rosetta James, 1995, dust suppression chamber. Isabel Martinez, 2002 guest room thermal regulator. Hundreds, then thousands. Some sent patent numbers long thought abandoned. Others mailed hand-drawn sketches on napkins or faded journal pages with dates scribbled in corners. One woman enclosed a Polaroid of her grandmother holding a soldering iron in a living room. Another sent a VHS tape of her aunt demonstrating a folding hinge made from cutlery. It wasn't just data, it was testimony. And for the first time in American legal history, a commission was empowered not to enforce silence, but to undo it. Jasmine Crockett was named chairwoman of the Commission for Inventor Restorative Recognition. Her first day on the job, she arrived early. The office still smelled of fresh paint and newly unpacked boxes. On her desk was a single file, case number 001. It wasn't her mother's. Dolores had already been honored. Her name read into the Library of Congress, her patent restored, her face immortalized in museum glass and bronze. No, this first file belonged to Bernice Holloway, a woman who had once designed a kitchen tool for the New Orleans Housing Authority in 1983, a tool later sold to a cookware brand for pennies. Her name had been removed from the packaging in 1990. Jasmine opened the file, read it slowly, and wrote the first line of what would become a legal precedent. Based on the testimony, supporting documentation, and corroborated product usage, we recommend full restoration of attribution for Ms. Holloway in recognition under Title II of the Dolores Act. And just like that, another name returned to history. It became ritual. One file, one memory, one woman, at a time. The commission held monthly hearings. Survivors told their stories under oath. One woman brought her daughter, another, her great-grandson. Every time a case was verified, the room applauded. Not loudly, but solemnly, like a wound closing quietly. The press called it the rewriting, but it wasn't rewriting. It was correction. A nation correcting the record, not out of charity, but duty. One morning, Jasmine stood beneath the Capitol dome, alone. The hall was quiet. She held in her hands a binder containing 173 validated names, each with new certificates, each entered into the National Registry of American Inventors. She walked past portraits of presidents, of generals, of men who'd always had the pen, and then, almost by instinct, she whispered her mother's name once more. Not for history, not for the press, but for the floor, the walls, the air that had once pretended she wasn't there. Dolores A. Crockett, inventor, restored. And for the first time in the Capitol's long, echoing silence, the building seemed to whisper it back. Power hates to lose. And Donald J. Trump had just lost control of the one thing he'd always considered untouchable, the story. No longer the showrunner, no longer the loudest voice, no longer the one who got the final word on who mattered and who was erased. Jasmine hadn't just wounded him politically. She'd exposed a truth deeper than a headline. She had made him irrelevant in the story of American greatness, and for a man whose image had always outpaced his substance, irrelevance was the deepest cut of all. So he did what he always did when the ground shook beneath him. He sued. Donald Trump versus Jasmine Crockett, et al. Federal claim, defamation, emotional harm, loss of business equity, political sabotage, damages sought, $200 million. Name co-defendants. My side of defense, United States Congress, House Oversight Committee, Commission for Inventor Recognition. He filed it not just for the money, he had long ceased caring about that, but to shift the spotlight, to reframe the narrative, to drag the story back onto his stage, even if it meant playing victim. His lawyer scheduled a press conference on the courthouse steps. He arrived in a Navy overcoat, flanked by advisors, waving printed slides of patent lists and a mocked-up graph labeled The Smear Campaign. He called Jasmine an ungrateful agitator, called Congress a Marxist circus, and declared with full-throated drama that this lawsuit would be the trial that restores the truth. But the court had other ideas. The motion was heard in federal district court in D.C., Judge Renee Lancaster presiding, a former litigator with a memory like a scalpel and no taste for theatrics. The hearing began at 9 o'clock a.m. sharp. Trump's legal team took 9 minutes to present their opening. The judge interrupted them only once, to ask whether the plaintiff had, at any point, disputed the authenticity of the Dolores Crockett patent. They hadn't. When Jasmine's counsel rose, a soft-spoken civil rights lawyer from Baltimore, she simply handed the judge a copy of the original Oversight Committee transcript and the commission's final report. Then she sat down. No speech, no argument, just evidence. At 9:12 a.m., Judge Lancaster cleared her throat, leaned forward slightly, and delivered a ruling that would be quoted in legal textbooks and kitchen calendars alike. This court does not exist to protect wounded pride from the truth. The patent is real. The record is public. The evidence is overwhelming, and no empire, no matter how gilded, can sue its way out of history. Motion denied. Case dismissed. Permanently. 12 minutes. That's all it took to dismantle the last gasp of denial. By noon, the phrase 12 minutes for the truth was trending in 4 countries. Teachers wrote it on chalkboards. Protesters printed it on T-shirts. A coffee shop in Oakland etched it onto foam and cappuccinos. One teenager in Kansas painted it across the side of his van. It wasn't about gloating. It was about gravity. 12 minutes to remind the nation that facts are louder than spin, that silence, once broken, cannot be unfired like a bullet, that when a black woman brings receipts, the courtroom doesn't get to look away. Trump left the courthouse through the back exit. No reporters, no rally, no tweet, no thunder. Just a man walking into a car, staring out a window, knowing the empire of spectacle he'd built brick by brick was now a skeleton. Exposed, silent, untouchable by lawsuits. And Jasmine? She didn't celebrate. She was already back at her desk reviewing 5 new cases submitted by rural inventors in Mississippi and Minnesota. She paused only once that day, when a courier brought a package to her office. Inside was a single item, a handle, the original one, worn, scratched, heat-scuffed at the edges. Her mother's prototype, recovered from the family garage and mailed anonymously, wrapped in velvet and newspaper clippings. Jasmine held it for a long time. No cameras, no lights, just the weight of memory and justice in her palm. She placed it on the shelf behind her desk, beside the Dolores Act binder. Then she picked up her pen and kept writing, because the story didn't end with a dismissal. It ended with restoration. And then, like all things built strong and clean, it began again. The kitchen was smaller than she remembered. The paint had faded. The linoleum tiles were cracked in places. The sink still groaned with a metal hiss when turned too fast. And the tiny square window above the stove, the one Dolores used to open when the steam got too heavy, still stuck halfway. But to Jasmine, it wasn't broken. It was sacred. She stood alone in the room, no cameras, no press, just morning light spilling in like it always had. Quiet, warm, determined. In her hands, a velvet box. Inside, the Presidential Medal for Civil Technological Contribution, posthumously awarded to Dolores A. Crockett, the first black woman ever to receive it for a patent created outside an academic or corporate lab. She placed it gently on the kitchen table. Same table where Dolores once spread out blueprints on old receipts. Same table where meals were measured by faith and flame. Same table where Jasmine first held a soldering iron, too big for her hands but never too big for her future. She sat in the old chair, the one with the uneven leg her mother never bothered to fix, and let herself breathe it all in, the past, the pain, the power, the sound of memory without mourning, the feel of victory that didn't need applause. And then softly, as if speaking to the walls themselves, "Mama, they finally said your name." She didn't expect a sign, no sudden warmth, no flickering light, just stillness, the kind that meant something was complete. On the table beside the medal, Jasmine placed a photograph. Dolores in her welding apron, holding up the prototype handle like it was nothing special. No smile, just eyes that said, "Of course I made it. I needed it." Those eyes still lived in Jasmine's face, but now they were also in others. Because out there across America, kitchens were buzzing, mothers were sketching, Teachers were compiling lesson plans. Students were asking questions that once got ignored. In Philadelphia, a high school added a new elective, Unsung Inventors of America. In Oakland, a tool company renamed its safety line the Crockett collection. In Atlanta, a mural went up, Dolores holding her invention, with the words, "Not just a handle on history." But perhaps the most powerful change didn't come from a courtroom or a law or a medal. It came from a question, a simple one Jasmine first heard whispered at a town hall, then on a podcast, then in the back row of a museum tour, and then in classrooms, at kitchen tables, over dinner, during bedtime stories. How many more names are buried beneath someone else's invention? It was no longer just about justice for the past. It was about vigilance for the future. Because names matter, not for ego, but for truth. Not for credit, but for legacy. Because if we know who built it, we remember who we owe. And if we remember who we owe, we build differently. That was Jasmine's mission now. She had done what she came to do. She had brought her mother's name out of the shadows. She had rewritten the record. She had passed the law. But now it was up to the next daughter, the next teacher, the next legislator who found a name in a folder and decided not to let it disappear. As Jasmine stood to leave, she ran her fingers along the counter edge, right where her mother used to brace herself after a long shift. She didn't cry. There was no need. The grief had bloomed into something else, something stronger, something living. She took one last look at the medal, the photo, the kitchen that had become a shrine without ever meaning to. And she whispered again, not to be heard, but to remember. They know now. Then she walked out the door, into the morning, into the work that never ends, into a country still learning how to say all the names it once made disappear. Because a legacy isn't something you inherit, it's something you finish, then pass on, and say aloud, so no one ever forgets. Legacy isn't measured by fame or fortune, but by the courage to create even when no one is watching, and the strength to speak when silence is expected. Dolores Crockett didn't build an empire. She built something better, the truth, welded in steel, passed down in blood, and finally spoken aloud. May we honor those whose hands shaped our world in quiet, and may we become the kind of people who ask not just what was made, but who was erased to make it. If this story made you pause, don't scroll past it, sit with it, share it, say the name out loud. Send it to someone who still believes history should tell the whole truth. Subscribe to Harrison Stories, where the erased are remembered and silence gets cross-examined. Hit the bell because the next chapter will ask harder questions. And maybe, just maybe, it'll change how you see whose name is missing. This story is a fictional dramatization, but the injustice is real. Any resemblance to real people or events is either coincidental or intentional. So we all reflect, question, and finally listen. Thanks for watching. Justice isn't discovered, it's uncovered. This is Harrison Stories.